On today's show, we'll touch on the controversial TJ Brodie buyout discourse and discuss whether or not it makes sense to do so. Also, three names have popped up in the Leafs assistant coaching search. All that and more coming up on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, along with my guy, Dave Morassutti. What's going on, pal?
Not doing too bad. Enjoying another summer night. Some hot weather coming. I'm heating up the pool, getting that ready for.
Yes.
Because I made the mistake one time of throwing in my pool steps when it was like 76 degrees in my pool. Not again.
That 76 is not warm enough for you?
Not when you have to try to get a pool steps into a pool. Not really. Not ideal.
Guy, it's June 19th. You don't have your pool all set up yet? My word, buddy. Got to get on that.
I'm behind. I'll get there for sure.
All right. Let's get to today's show. So we've been discussing kind of throughout the day. If you look all over Leafs Twitter, there's a very controversial topic that's now hit the Twitterverse, I suppose, and all the blogs and whatnot. And it's whether or not the team should buy out TJ Brodie. This was not a name that 2 weeks ago was really thrown into the buyout window discussion. It was always Matt Murray was their number one buyout candidate. And then all of a sudden it appears that TJ Brodie's name is being brought up into these discussions really quickly, as I guess it's still fresh, as this has been a very recent topic that's been broached here within Leafs Nation. I mean, what was your initial reaction when you first saw the discourse around a TJ Brodie buyout? Do you get it? Do you not get it? Like, what was your initial reaction?
I didn't get it. I was just like, TJ. We're talking about TJ Brodie, right? There's not like some other Brodie that I hadn't heard about. Like, and also listening to the like where this kind of discourse started off, right? I think it was Frank Saravalli that started off, and I'm just like listening to the reasoning behind it. I'm like, what? like part of the reason why the Leafs may not want to buy out Matt Murray is because they don't want that extra cap charge next year. You're gonna do that for TJ Brodie? So I was just like shaking my head, and then obviously we put the poll out on our Twitter feed just to say, should the Leafs even consider this? And then I got a bunch of messages saying, I'm like, guy, we're not asking for this. I'm not asking for this. And I'm just like, I don't get, I understand it's a slow time in the hockey news department, Rubin department, but like, this is not something you just throw out there and hope it sticks and you can create a debate about in a way.
Yeah, let's not go any further before we do say that we completely do not agree with buying out TJ Brodie. We'll go into the reasons why that is throughout today's show. But first and foremost, Locked On Leafs, not on board with a TJ Brodie buyout. I was like just beside myself when I saw this discourse going around, and I'm thinking to myself, TJ Brodie is this team's like second best defenseman. And often their best defenseman. Like, realistically, TJ Brodie in the last 2 years has probably been the most consistent defender for this team. Like, he's really the only guy who I would say is like a shutdown guy for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And why there's any discourse at all about buying him out just was absolute lunacy to me. And I understand the fact that, yes, buying him out would give the Maple Leafs an additional $5 million in cap savings this year, that Brad Treliving could go out and make a move, make a trade, make some sort of signing to bring in, somebody else who might be an upgrade over TJ Brodie. But ultimately, I don't think that's what you want to do because, like you mentioned, that means The following season, there's a $2.5 million dead cap charge, and that would be the season that one of, or maybe both of, Austin Matthews and William Nylander's deals could end up coming up. And you want to save as much cap that year as you possibly can. I know it's going up, but I'm sure pretty much best case scenario, the amount it's going up, probably going to be the amount that both Nylander and Matthews will get with their raises. So I'm not sure you want to be adding much unnecessary cap. TJ Brodie would be considered unnecessary because he's still a good player. He's still a serviceable top 4 defenseman. The guy played 21 minutes a night for this team last season. Did he have a tough playoffs? Yes, he did. He was injured last year. Let me go and say this. He was not the same TJ Brodie that he was the past few seasons. Now, you could look at that. If we're looking at the, why maybe you buy him out case, I suppose. Okay, yes, he's 33 years old. And you look at last season, career worst, 14 points, tied for career worst, and played just 58 games in the regular season. And then, wasn't really all that good in the playoffs as well with Jake McCabe. Now, those are all the reasons, I think, the only real reasons why somebody would say, yes, buy out TJ Brodie, because perhaps all of that means that his game is starting to potentially decline, and maybe you get away from that before that happens. But there's only 1 year left on this deal. Like, if his game has declined where he's no longer a top pair guy and, he can only play 19 minutes or 18 minutes as your number 4, you're still good paying your number 4 $5 million in today's NHL. There is absolutely no reason, no justifying the potential buyout of a TJ Brodie in my mind. No justification whatsoever.
Like, you're talking about wasting cap space, and like, I don't know if it's just because
Dude, I don't even want to look forward to wasting cap space. He is one of the team's best defensemen.
Yeah, who you
Like
replace
that. I don't even need to move forward into the cap discussion. He's literally this team's second best defenseman behind Morgan Rielly. And often last year, when Morgan Rielly was not playing very well, he was the team's best defenseman. And he's been looked at that ever since he got here. He's been a model of consistency for many, many years. Anytime a defenseman wasn't playing well, you put him with TJ Brodie, and all of a sudden, okay, that's when he's at his best. Morgan Rielly was at his best with TJ Brodie as his partner. Justin Hall at his best with TJ Brodie as his partner. Jake Muzzin at his best with TJ Brodie as his partner. What's the common denominator in all of that? TJ freaking Brodie, man. Like, there is absolutely no reason why people believe that you should buy him out and give yourself, first of all, take him away off your roster next year and also have a dead cap charge 2 years from now. It's just absolutely asinine. He is still a really, really good, talented defenseman.
And to add on top of that, you get rid of that, you get rid of him, you add that 2.5 of dead cap next year, you still have to replace TJ Brodie. And I'm telling you right now, the replacement for TJ Brodie is not going to cost less than what TJ Brodie is making right now.
Probably not. Like,
top 4 defensemen usually run $5+ million a season.
Yeah, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, I do have some numbers that I actually would even back up why moving on from TJ Brodie wouldn't be a smart choice, because then there's the discussion, okay, if you're not buying him out, is he at least, worth exploring a trade for? I think that's a completely different conversation. And that might be something that you could be worthy of exploring. But a buyout, there is no explanation that Brad Treliving could give me in a press conference that would make a TJ Brodie buyout make sense. It just simply wouldn't. He's a good player on a respectable cap hit that still plays over 21 minutes a game, and it is considered your anchor as a shutdown pair for the last 3-4 seasons here with Toronto. So I just think that it's a ridiculous conversation that's being had out there. I know it's very much just, shooting from the hip in a way. People are just, what's the word I'm looking for here? Just spitballing when they're having these discussions, just discussing, some dark horse bio candidates. But to me, this one's not even a conversation or a question for me. That being said, Dave, why don't we take a quick break? When we get back, we can dig into it a little bit. I've got some numbers to suggest why TJ Brodie, maybe his season last year wasn't actually nearly as bad as some people are making it out to be, and why it would be a benefit, I believe, for Toronto to keep him around. But we could have that discussion if whether or not he could be trade bait as well. So we'll do that on the other side. Also, some names were mentioned on 32 Thoughts today as some potential assistant coaching candidates. So we'll tell you who those names are as well. But before we get into all of that, let me tell you about one of today's show sponsors, and it's our good friends at eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with their vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for green checks. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. This is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast. We do each Monday through Friday. We upload new videos. So if you're new to the podcast, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for giving us a chance and taking a listen to see what we got to provide. I know there's a lot of brand new subscribers of late who've kind of tagged along after my departure with the whole Leafs launch situation. So thank you to those who have joined me and joined Dave and I on this journey with Locked On Leafs throughout the off season. We are doing podcasts all throughout the off season as well. So make sure that if you are listening and you do want to be locked in on what's going on with the Maple Leafs throughout the next few months, you got to be subscribed to the Locked On Leafs podcast. Also, we want to know from you guys down below in the comment section. Let us know, what are your thoughts on this whole TJ Brodie buyout saga or situation, controversy, if you will. Let us know down below what you think of the conversation, because Dave and I clearly not big fans of the buyout option of TJ Brodie. But are you willing to entertain potentially, Dave, a trade of TJ Brodie? Does that interest you at all?
I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? Like, the whole point of trading a player is you got to have a replacement in line, right? Like, you have to know, okay, we're moving TJ Brodie, but we're going to be getting somebody equal or better in terms of play style, and maybe cheaper. Maybe you're getting a clear upgrade and he has to be a part of the deal. Like, I'm not married to the TJ Brodie in the fact that he's an untouchable, but I'm also like, I'm not just going to trade him away just for the sake of trading him away either.
So what if I was to say, for a second line winger, would you trade TJ Brodie for a second line winger who makes in the realm of, I don't know, like $3.5 million?
Yeah, it would depend on who that player is. I probably would say no, just because of the role that TJ Brodie plays. It's harder to find those defensemen that can play the tough minutes in your top four, play both left and right. Let's not forget that as well. He is a left shot that can play the right side. So, like, it'd have to be a no-brainer sort of move to do like a 1-for-1 situation like that. I would lean towards no, just because of the role he plays.
So I'll give you a couple of reasons as to why I think maybe it's possible we could see TJ Brodie trade. A buyout, I think, is 0% likelihood of it happening. I think there's I wouldn't say strong likelihood of him getting traded, but I think that if you're looking at players who potentially could be dealt to open up some cap space or to make some sort of change on this team, well, it's been reported that they have no interest in trading the core four. They would like to return them and bring them all back. Well, then you start looking around the rest of that roster and that team. You're probably not trading Morgan Riley. So the next guy who's making a little bit of money in order to be able to make some actual change with this team would be TJ Brodie. Like that is one of the benefits if you could try and find someone to take him on. You'll definitely get an asset for him, which is also why you don't buy him out. He's worth something. You will get assets for TJ Brodie. So you get an asset back, but then you also open up that cap space to do, something else, whether that's replace him by signing another defenseman, or you trade for a younger defenseman and hope that he can grow into a TJ Brodie, or you trade for multiple guys, whatever you may want to do. That is a possibility. And the reason why I say where it's possible is because we've talked about this in the past, Dave. what type of defenseman Brad Treliving typically likes to employ, right? You look at his team last year in Calgary, and he only had one guy last season on the Flames who was under 200 pounds on the blue line, and that was Chris Tanev, who's a pretty nails dude and plays a hard-nosed defensive style game, and you wouldn't think that he's under 2 bills, but he was like 197 or something like that, 196, I think. You look at TJ Brodie, and he's listed at 187. So it's a little bit of a smaller defenseman in terms of what Treliving typically likes to have on his blue lines. And also, I know there's a lot of links between the fact that, okay, Treliving and TJ Brodie have a history together. But what did Brad Treliving not do in 2020?
Sign TJ Brodie.
He did not re-sign TJ Brodie. He let him walk to free agency where Kyle Dubas scooped him up. So clearly he doesn't value TJ Brodie as much as maybe Kyle Dubas valued him. And if that's the case, perhaps, again, another reason why Brad Treliving could look to move on from TJ Brodie. So I'm just giving some reasons here as to potentially why we could see a trade, potentially. I think that's more likely than a buyout. Would I do this, however, Dave? I think I'm aligning with you. It would, I think it would maybe have, I would have to definitely, I would consider a trade for sure, but it would have to be for something that's going to make this team better, younger, bigger. I think it would have to make a lot of sense for them to do it, because you're looking at a guy who last year still was a very quality, productive top 4 player. Who was, if you want to look at it in the playoffs last year, let me see, what are his stats here in the playoffs? He had a 221 expected goals against, which was the second best defensive expected goals against among the Toronto Maple Leafs at 5-on-5, gave up the least amount of scoring chances per 60 among all D-men, and that was in, mostly defensive zone starts as this team's shut down defenseman. You look in the regular season as well, same thing. You look at it, he's gave up the least amount of shots against per 60, had the lowest expected goals per 60 on the team, and the least amount of scoring chances and high danger chances against as well. So he's pretty solid in his own end when it comes to limiting the opposition's offense. And that's exactly what you want a defenseman to do, right? Limit the other team as much as they can in the offensive end. And TJ Brodie is a shot suppressor and doesn't allow a whole lot. Also was a plus category in the takeaway, giveaway margins there. So that's another good sign as well. So I just don't think that when you look at TJ Brodie, that his numbers have slipped nearly as much as maybe some are making it seem, just based on his point total being really low last year, just 14 points. Still played over 21 minutes a game and was very, very productive. Just had a tough first round alongside Jake McCabe against Tampa Bay. You take that out of the equation, and this guy had a pretty solid season last year at the Toronto Maple Leafs, well worth $5 million, and certainly a guy that I would be willing to deploy out there next season with the Toronto Maple Leafs. But if the right trade came along, certainly I think Treliving should also be listening on that for, the reasons that we mentioned, the turnover that we are expecting. It's got to come from someone. If it's not the top 4, hit that $5 million that's attached to Brodie's contract, that could allow for the Maple Leafs to do something. Plus, he is 33 years old. So he is kind of at that age where things start to go downhill. If he could get ahead of that a little bit, extract some value out of him, maybe it would make some sense. But I don't think that he's washed by any means. I think he could still be a valuable top 4 defenseman.
I think so. And yeah, unless you're getting a deal that blows you away, or you're trying to think, like, we don't see him sticking around past this year. Let's see if we can maybe find a more long-term solution. You could look at that, but looking at what is going to make, if you look at other teams throughout the playoffs, it's the depth of their defensemen make the smart plays, that don't take as many risks. Like TJ Brodie does not take a lot of risks when you watch him play. He's very steady. Maybe the one criticism I have is he likes to do those dives along the ice.
Yeah, pretty good at them though.
He can be
Yeah,
pretty good at them,
little
although
belly slide.
when it doesn't work, it makes him look it doesn't make him look good, but he's usually pretty good. I just think that ever since TJ Brodie has come to Toronto, like the Leafs blue line was putrid before TJ Brodie got here. And he was kind of that start of that shift of where the Leafs blue line wasn't viewed as their biggest weakness as it was in years past. So you'd have to really be getting a much better player replacing him if you're going to be going down that route.
Yeah, and maybe even not better, but like you'd have to get a different kind of player, I guess, would probably be, because who's going to trade you a better player for 33-year-old TJ Brodie? Nobody. But if you might be able to get a different player potentially in a deal, like a Joel Edmondson type of guy who's just, a different type of player. I don't know if I'd be willing to go there, but that was just an example that was at the top of my head. But maybe it's something that we could explore. Is there a TJ Brodie trade that you've explored as the listener? If you don't want to know, or if you want to tell us one of the TJ Brodie trades proposals that you've kind of thrown out there into the universe, why don't you let us know down again in the YouTube comments? What's a TJ Brodie trade package that you want us to comment on potentially? Let us know in the comments down below. All right, we'll take one more break. When we get back, Dave, we'll get to those 3 names that were mentioned today as potential assistant coach candidates to replace Spencer Carbery. So we'll do that in just a moment. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. Listen to Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano. Got Dave Morassutti with me. And Dave, we heard, on yesterday's show, if you missed yesterday's podcast, make sure you go and have a listen to that one. But we discussed the likelihood of Sheldon Keefe staying put and being, the guy next year. It sounds as though it's more likely that he's going to receive an extension than get fired. And that's mainly because we're hearing word that, they're discussing assistant coaching options for him. And I would imagine if they were to be discussing assistants, it'd be weird if they were to fire him by doing that. So it pretty much confirms that Sheldon Keefe is going to return, and there's a good chance that he ends up with an extension. Anyways, we talked more about that yesterday. But what we didn't know at the time of the conversation yesterday were any names to watch in the Leafs assistant coaching search. It sounds like there are a few names that have been popping up. We heard on the 32 Thoughts podcast today, Jeff Merrick had a few names that he was told to listen on. I don't know if you have the list of names. Yeah. Okay. Why don't you go ahead and tell me the list of names here?
Yeah. So we have Carl Taylor,
yep,
Todd Nelson, and Mitch Love.
So do any of those names perk your ears at all?
So one that does for me, and again, this is another connection with Brad Treliving, is Mitch Love, who is the head coach of the Calgary Wranglers. Yeah. And it's funny enough, he was one of like the finalists for the Flames coaching job before they gave it to Ryan Huska. Huska? I'm not. Huska. Okay. So I do think that name, that was like one name when I read it, I'm like, Mitch Love, I've heard that one. And then I kind of connected the dots there. So I know that he's somebody that wants to get into the NHL. He's somebody that, and he's someone that's getting interest from other teams. So that was an interesting name. Obviously, we know Todd Nelson from, his coaching days. Well, first off, playing days, and also from his time with the Oilers when they were not very good. But I think that was also because the Oilers just were not trying to be good at that time. So there's the Todd Nelson one there. And then
he was also he did spend the last 4 seasons, Todd Nelson, with the Dallas Stars as an assistant.
And
So I
was the
think,
Hershey Bears coach this year in the AHL.
yeah, this series with the Hershey Bears, he was the head coach in the AHL. But I think you look at the Dallas Stars, and that's a team that went to a Cup final with him on the bench. So, and they've been a really solid team the last few seasons, and they've been able to develop some decent talent. How much Todd Nelson has to do with that, I obviously am not 100% sure, but that was a name that I recognized, obviously. Mainly as an Edmonton Oiler head coach that one year, but also just realizing that he was on the bench for the Dallas Stars over the last few seasons. But yeah, last year got back to being a head coach in the AHL. So that's another interesting option. Carl Taylor, though, I got to tell you, it's the first time I've heard that guy's name in my life.
Yeah, so he's the coach of the AHL's Milwaukee Admirals. He's been there since 2018. He did not get the job when the Predators decided to finally get rid of John Hines. That went to Andrew Brunette. And Barry Trotz kind of made, he's like, we think he's going to probably get an NHL job. So he's probably not expected to be back in the NHL. He also said like, I think he's, he would be a good head coach. And I'm like, you guys had an opening and you didn't hire the guy who's been in your organization. So I always find that quite interesting. Milwaukee, it's been a pretty decent AHL team. So his name doesn't speak to me like Mitch Love or Todd Nelson does, in my opinion. So I would expect, though, if they're already hiring and looking at names and names, we might see that vacancy fill up rather soon.
Yeah, just looking now, he's 52 years old, so he's a little bit on the older side, an older fella. But has spent the last 4 years with the Milwaukee Admirals. 2 of those years were playoff seasons for them. Was this year not a playoff year for them? Weird. That is .618 win percentage. How's that possible that wasn't a playoff year? Maybe it just doesn't say what they did in that season. But before that, Texas Stars as an assistant. So he's been in the AHL for quite some time, since 2011, 2012. So about 10 years he spent as an assistant and head coach in the AHL. So he might be ready for the next step to get up to the NHL. So that's another name to kind of keep an eye on. Carl Taylor as a possibility to take over Spencer Carbery's position as the assistant. Let's keep in mind too. I noticed I saw somebody comment on the last video that isn't Manny Malhotra still the power play coach and in the fold? Yeah, because if you'll remember, Manny Malhotra before Carbery came was the power play coach and was the assistant, and then they just hired Carbery and just kind of moved Malhotra. Like, it wasn't as if it's I don't know, it was kind of weird. Like, then they all of a sudden just had like 3 assistant coaches. Right? They didn't fire Malhotra; they kept him on to help with the team, and then just also hired someone else to quarterback the power play and be the power play coach. So I guess theoretically they could do, get somebody else, another specialist. Malhotra could go back to the power play, but it didn't go very well when he was in charge of the PP. So that's why they brought in Spencer Carbery. So I wouldn't expect that to happen. I just want to address that comment because I did see somebody in the comment section on the last video say, wasn't it Malhotra who was involved in charge of the power play? Yeah, it was a few seasons ago. Then once Carbery came into the fold, he took over, and Malhotra just kind of became just kind of a specialist, a face-off specialist, basically, which has helped. I mean, the team has been one of the top face-off teams in the last 3 seasons since Malhotra came into the fold. So there certainly is definitely a benefit to having him around as well. And plus, Malhotra was always known as a penalty killer more than he was as a power play guy. I always found it odd when he was the PP coach. I was like, he was more of a penalty kill specialist, but okay, sure, whatever. But yeah, so I would anticipate whoever comes in is going to be more of an offensive mind. And if I recall correctly, that was one of the reasons why Todd Nelson ended up kind of getting elevated into a role in Edmonton when they had that young team hoping to, get some offense out of that young group. So maybe he's an option. And like you said, at this point, maybe Mitch Love might be the better of the 3 options out there, who's had some success, a bit of a younger guy. I think he's like late 30s, so more in line with the age of Sheldon Keefe, I guess, somewhat. But we'll see what ends up happening. I'm sure we'll hear of more names. Nothing is official. These are all reports of just names that was heard by Jeff Merrick. But potentially at some point we could hear other names. Apparently Travis Green, former Maple Leaf, former head coach of the Vancouver Canucks, was in the mix until he took an assistant's role with the New Jersey Devils earlier today. And our boy, friend of the show, Nick Alberga of the Leafs Morning Take, also reporting that Brucey Boudreau has not yet been contacted for the position of assistant. So for those who are hoping to get Brucey back on the bench in Toronto, maybe won't be happening here. Potentially they'll be going in a bit of a different direction. Who that is, we'll have to find out on a later date. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast, though. Appreciate everyone for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, smash that like button, subscribe, leave a comment down below on Twitter or on YouTube as well. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.